Welcome again, everyone. Since this is our first session, I'm going to reiterate my introduction in case anyone's just now joining us. So again, I'm Danielle Brooks Ritchie. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a recruiting programs coordinator. And as most of you know, Laura Hickerson, who's co-presenting with me this morning, is our Assistant Director for Employer Relations, and she also uses she, her pronouns. So today we're going to be talking through your available options and best practices for recruiting JMU students this fall semester. As we're aware and Lee spoke to, it's definitely a unique recruiting landscape. So we're going to walk through some best practices for recruiting on campus in a hybrid environment and then in a fully virtual environment as well. So we'll also be monitoring the chat box throughout the event, and we're going to leave 5 to 10 minutes at the end to address your questions. So you can hold on to them until that portion, or if you're afraid you'll forget, you can drop them in the chat now and we will address them later. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So to start off, we'll talk through how you can participate in some of our core recruiting programming and events, and how COVID has shifted some of those engagement opportunities to definitely still being important parts of your recruiting strategy, but just looking a little different this year. So you have a few different options for interviewing JMU students this semester. As Lee said, we are planning on having students physically back on campus, so we are able to offer limited scale on-campus interviews. Our team has very carefully put together some social distancing protocols just to keep everybody safe. So just a note, if you're thinking of going that route, that masks will be required for both students and interviewers for your entire interview day if you choose to come to campus, including while you're in your interview room with a candidate. So just something to bear in mind. Now, if your team would rather hold on-campus interviews right now, but you're not sure if maybe your organization will want to pivot to virtual or further limit travel later, we still encourage you to go ahead and submit your interview date request through Handshake now. And you can just let us know before your application deadline if you want to switch to virtual. I'm actually your point of contact for any questions about that, and I can manage all of that on the back end for you. So don't stress out about having to switch to virtual later. We will be A-okay. We're also asking those of you who do want to hold in-person interviews to just be very mindful of the need to be flexible with any of our students if they do ask you to switch to one virtual interview. So if you have an on-campus interview schedule and you're having 1 or 2 students who ask to do virtual even though you're physically on campus, just bear in mind that there could be a lot of reasons for that, and try to be accommodating of that request. And do your best to avoid sounding as though you're requesting a reason for them to want to go virtual. You want to avoid potentially putting any students in any disclosure-related situations. That said, a majority of us are certainly looking at an entirely virtual recruiting semester, including interviews. So for those of you who would like to host your interviews virtually, again, we still recommend submitting your request through Handshake, and just make sure you're letting us know when you submit it in the way that you're naming your schedule that you'd like to go virtual. So some of the pros for still submitting things through Handshake when you go virtual: you can gather your applicants and manage scheduling signups, as some of you who have already done that are familiar with. And with this route, we're also available to help you keep an eye on your scheduling timeline. We can prompt you for upcoming deadlines, and we can also kind of keep an eye on how things are going for you and reach out with strategy suggestions if we think a slight pivot would be helpful. And keeping your schedule on Handshake is also the best way to reach our students. We can promote the positions associated with your interview date much more easily that way, and it's a more equitable way for students to have access to find out about your opportunities. And for our employers joining us today who have the core employer Handshake account, which is essentially the free version of Handshake, you can set up your virtual interviews through Handshake, and then we'll walk you through where to insert a link to insert out to your Zoom or whatever your preferred video platform is for day of interviews. And then any employers who are joining us who have premium Handshake accounts, you'll actually have video software built into Handshake, so you won't need to leave Handshake to make that happen day of. Later in the session, we'll talk through best practices for managing those virtual interviews as well. So for your recruiting events, again, you do have on-campus and virtual options. We're able to work with you to host smaller on-campus events, but again, we'll have safety guidelines in place to keep everyone safe, including decreased room capacities to ensure we're having enough space for social distancing requirements, again, mask requirements while you're on campus inside, and we're going to be limiting employers to bringing 2 representatives per organization to attend any on-campus events. And if you do decide to submit a request for an on-campus event, I'll be in touch with you just to walk through what your best options are based on the goals for your event. We definitely can work with you to have on-campus events take place. We encourage you to do that if that's important to your recruiting strategy. But we also understand that with events needing to stay a lot smaller than usual to stay safe, you may choose to go virtual depending on what you were hoping to accomplish. So you can post those virtual events in Handshake as well. And again, similarly to your interview day, you can always schedule an on-campus event now and just reach out to us and let us talk it through with you if you need to pivot to going virtual later. And shortly, I'll also walk through some of those virtual event planning best practices as well. Finally, we have some of our career fairs and other events happening this semester. I know some of our participants today are already signed up to attend some of our career fairs, which is wonderful. So this is not new information to those of you, but we have pivoted to going virtual with all of our career fairs this semester. And again, constraints surrounding space options, social distancing, and fairly strict safety-based attendance limitations are prompting us to move to this virtual transition. But that said, we're confident that the virtual fair will be safe for our students and employer partners. And we're really looking at creative ways to continue creating engagement opportunities and connection that'll still be valuable to your recruiting efforts. So some of the things that you can go sign up for in Handshake after the conference today include our campus-wide career fair, which some of you know that's open to all of our majors, and that's a great fit if you're looking to recruit across several majors here at JMU. And then we have our SIZE career fair, which is perfect if you're interested in students from JMU's College of Integrated Science and Engineering. We have our Hart School Career and Internship Fair if you're looking for students majoring in hospitality management or sports and recreation management. And across those fairs, we will be using Handshake's fair, virtual fair option. So that will give you the option to add up to 30 team members to help you on your end participate and monitor and manage things in this virtual setting. And we'll also have the option to build both group sessions and one-on-one sessions with students, So you'll have up to 5 group sessions, and you'll be able to have up to 50 students in each of those group sessions. And sort of similarly to the way that we see differences in how students prepare for our in-person on-campus career fairs, students will again have the option to create their schedules ahead of time. So once you create your fair schedule, they'll be able to sign up for available sessions or one-on-one times ahead of time, but they can also still sign up day of as well. So we've seen Handshake trying really hard to help us sort of serve both of those kinds of students who prefer to plan ahead of time or wait until closer to time. And for anybody who's already registered for a fair or is thinking about registering for a fair, we do know that Handshake is offering virtual fair training for employers on Wednesday, August 19th. And we're going to be including a link for how to register for that training in our follow-up communication after the conference today. So highly encourage that if you're thinking of participating in a virtual fair. And then finally, we have our practice interview event, which is free for employers to participate in, also virtual this semester. And it's a way that you can help students prepare for interviews and build your brand on campus. So essentially, you'll be conducting virtual behavioral practice interviews with students, and you'll be able to share feedback with them on their interview skills, which is really valuable both for you and for them. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we'll walk through just a few best practices for thinking through how to set up your virtual events, both from planning all the way through to post-event follow-up. So considering your scheduling strategy, Tuesdays and Thursdays do work best for our student engagement, preferably in the afternoon or early evening. So between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. is when we see the most student engagement with these virtual events. We did also want to let you know that to help limit COVID spread, JMU has specific time periods that they're shutting down classroom spaces for cleaning. So on those Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., we know that students won't be in class for those cleaning periods. So that gives you a consistent time frame to keep in mind if you're looking for a time that won't conflict with class schedules. So Zoom fatigue is very real for our students, and I'm sure for some of us this semester already. So definitely limit your virtual event to no more than an hour. Presenting content for longer than 45 minutes tends to be pretty draining. So try to leave at least 15 minutes at the end, either for student questions or for any kind of engagement opportunities like casual informal networking. To speak to some logistics, you do have the option to allow students to register in advance through Handshake, which we recommend. And that also gives you the option to send bulk reminders to those students who have already RSVP'd. And in those reminders, we recommend including a point of contact for questions about the event, and also be sure to specify a point of contact for any accessibility questions. We also recommend involving a minimum of 2 of your representatives in your session to help manage logistics. So that way you have at least one person who's comfortable hosting and presenting, and another to field the chat for questions and be available behind the scenes if any attendees have technical trouble getting in. We know that a lot of the students are more tech savvy than we are at this point, but just something to bear in mind so that they can get back in if something goes wrong. We also encourage you to record your presentation so that you can send the recording out to participants and any RSVPs who weren't able to make it afterward. And finally, if you're asking students to submit questions through the chat as they think of them, we see an increase in engagement if you let them submit their questions throughout your session and then carve out time at the end to answer them. Folks tend to stick around if they know that their specific questions will be answered later on. And you'll also want to make sure that once we've had the chance to approve your virtual event, that you're submitting a request for promotion as early as possible. Morgan, our marketing coordinator, is going to speak more to this in our session later today on promotion best practices. But just as a quick tip, there's no such thing as too early to submit your promotion materials once your event has been approved. You'll also want to think about accessibility and universal design. As I said, in your messaging to RSVPs, you'll want to make sure that you're including a point of contact for accessibility for your event. You should also provide a specific time frame that students should reach out to you by to ensure reasonable attempts at an accommodation can be made. So as an example, if you were to tell them to make sure to reach out, exactly 2 business days prior to the start time of your event, that gives them something to work with rather than them being unsure if you could accommodate something the day of. You'll also want to provide information in your messaging reminders on how to turn on captioning for your preferred platform if that's available. And when possible, provide info on how to dial in from a phone as well as via computer. For all of your actual presentations, you'll also want to make sure you're using clear language, large fonts, and high color contrast for your presentation slides. If possible, provide captions, or as I mentioned, include instructions for how to turn those on. And if you have any images that give specific information, such as infographics, make sure you're providing verbal descriptions of those as well. For your content itself, you'll want to be kind of mindful about how you're curating that. So for our students, the less scripted, the better for them. They're wanting specifically to hear from current employers in a more casual, personalized way. So some things you could think about are finding ways to display camaraderie between your existing employees by maybe doing community panels or virtual office tours. And that's something that resonates with JMU students and also just Gen Z students in general. So our students are definitely very value driven during their job search, which is something that Lee highlighted this morning as well. So we recommend carving out time in the beginning of your sessions to discuss your company's diversity goals, your EEOC statement, or maybe talk about how your team defines the value of diversity in the workplace. So one way you could frame your approach to incorporating that content might be think through how you would answer the question, how does our company work both to hire and to retain a diverse staff? Those are the kinds of things that students will probably have follow-up questions, but they'll appreciate that you're preemptively including that content and recognizing its value. So you'll also want to make sure, those of you who are going to be presenting in these virtual events, that you're trained and you have common language to answer questions about diversity and inclusion efforts at your company. Be prepared to highlight and talk about any employee resource groups if you do have those. And as I mentioned, since scripted dialogue doesn't tend to resonate with our students, it's best to, rather than memorizing how to discuss these topics, get comfortable and practice talking about them organically. If you're presenting, you might consider doing what our staff did this morning and include your pronouns when you're introducing yourself. But just be sure that you're not unintentionally causing a situation where a student has to out themselves. So you never want to ask all of your participants to provide their pronouns, but you can offer yours if you're comfortable doing so. And then something that we have found even more true than ever in virtual environments is that events with more educational components do see better student turnout. So in the description of your event and in any of the text that you're providing to us when you request promotion, you'll want to highlight specifically what are the students going to learn or take away from participating. So something really generic like join us to learn more about opportunities with X company, that's specific, but it's not particularly compelling. So you might think about, just as an example, maybe join X company to discuss our workplace culture, our upcoming opportunities, and strategies to stand out to recruiters in a virtual interview setting. So something more specific like that is much more interesting to students than another info session. You might consider sort of creating hybrid virtual events to keep things engaging throughout your hour. So you might maybe frame things as first you could discuss your company's culture and values, your opportunities you have coming up, and then you could follow with something like either breakout rooms for one-on-one or group session resume views or informal discussions and networking. Some other educational topics you might include could be sharing tips for virtual recruiting etiquette from your perspective as an employer. Students really like to hear from folks who are familiar with being on the other end of that interview. So talking through things that stand out to you in a positive way is always really helpful. You could talk through tips for evaluating offers given our current economic climate. And you could highlight in your description of the event the chance to network in a very casual virtual setting. So just as an example, we know that sometimes the word networking can be a little bit stressful for students. So the more that you can emphasize that it's casual, the better. And finally, after the event, we do recommend some targeted follow-up. So you'll want to message all of your attendees with a link to your recording and any calls to action, ideally hyperlinked to where they need to go to make their next move. And you'll want to include a point of contact for follow-up questions. We also recommend sending a separate follow-up to anybody who RSVP'd for you in Handshake, but then didn't actually show to your virtual event. You can still message them, include some language to the effect of, we're sorry you couldn't attend, and still include that link to the recording and mention that there's still valuable information that you hope that they have a chance to look through. There is typically a drop-off between the number of students who RSVP in Handshake and who end up attending. So that's nothing personal for your event specifically. If you do see that, that is normal to see some drop-off. Between Zoom fatigue, managing hybrid class scheduling, and time differences for some of our students, being able to record that session and then share the link afterward is really helpful for students who might have had conflicts, or our international students can watch it at a time that makes more sense for them based on time zone. And just again, to reiterate, if you do have a drop off in attendance, students likely had a conflict, so their lack of attendance at any synchronous events after RSVPing doesn't necessarily indicate that they've lost interest in your company. So that's important to bear in mind. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So finally, I'll talk a little bit about some best practices for managing virtual interviews. So one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle for gathering applicants for your virtual interviews is how you're wording the language in your posting that's associated with your schedule. So you'll want to think through any specific qualifications that might be hindering your diversity recruitment goals, even if it's unintentional. One specific example is that including GPA minimums for entry-level positions has a disproportionately negative impact on low-income students and statistically Black and Hispanic students. So something to bear in mind if you do have the option to move away from being so stringent about GPA minimums, because that does discourage some students from applying who would otherwise be very well qualified and wonderful candidates for your opportunities. You'll also want to just think through some of the language in your job descriptions. Are you using inclusive language like partner versus spouse, things like that? And if you know that your company already has a robust and inclusive benefits package that would appeal to LGBTQ plus candidates or maybe candidates with disabilities, you'll want to highlight those features in the job description language as well. And we also know that students are searching heavily for remote internships and jobs right now. So you'll notice that when you attach a position that you're hiring for to your interview schedule, you'll have the option to check a box that says that you're allowing remote workers. Just as a quick handshake tip, we recommend also including verbiage indicating that the job can be remote in your job description as well. Or even better, if you can include it in the job title, that would be ideal. Students can search for positions using the keyword search function in Handshake. And if you're only checking the box that you're allowing remote workers, you'd be missing those students because those keyword searches only pull from the job description and the title. If you're shifting to a virtual recruiting model, you'll also want to be aware of your application deadlines, and you can reach out to us if you'd like to make changes to your deadlines, or if you'd like to strategize what your deadlines should look like in relation to what other virtual things you're engaging in this semester. So just as some key examples to bear in mind, before your applications even open for those positions with your interviews, this one seems straightforward, but you'd be surprised how often it gets forgotten. You have to make sure you've attached a position to your interview schedule. So we will be reaching out to remind you of these things, but just bear in mind that if you do miss that deadline to attach your position, it's not the end of the world, but you are unintentionally shortening your own time frame for collecting applicants. You'll also want to review that timeline for any dates you'd like us to change before your applications open. And if you can submit promotion materials before your applications open, that's also ideal. Now, during the time frame where your applications are open, but before it closes, that's when you'll want to be thinking through what virtual events do I want to hold? Do I want to do any virtual or in-person presentations, classroom engagement? Am I going to attend a career fair? You'll want to make sure that you're doing those core things while you're still able to virtually funnel your students that you meet to apply to your open positions. And it makes it a little bit more seamless for shifting into having an interview day with you all. And if you're working a more traditional Monday through Friday schedule this semester, you'll want to be careful to avoid having all of the deadlines that you as the employer are responsible for falling over the weekend. We've noticed it's a little bit easier to overlook these details in a virtual environment, but missing a deadline to invite students to sign up for interviews is especially confusing for applicants right now. The way it displays for them in Handshake is that it appears as though they were not invited. So you don't want to unintentionally send mixed messages about your interest in your applicants. And then finally, you'll also want to think through not condensing your schedule to the point that students don't have very much time to sign up for a time slot to interview with you. At minimum, we recommend giving students at least 3 days to sign up. Their schedules are going to be more chaotic now than ever, so condensing that sign up can be especially problematic, and you don't want to miss out on any really good applicants by only giving them a day and a half to sign up. And then communication is especially key in this format. So more communication is usually best in this environment. You'll want to make sure that all of your applicants have the correct interview time when you're sending any reminders, potentially adjusting for different time zones. So we recommend including the time zone for anybody who's not in yours so that they can accommodate that on their end. And as for planning with events, we do recommend providing students with contact info for questions about their virtual sessions, and then specifying whether that's the best contact for any accessibility questions, or if you have a different contact for that, include that there as well. And leading up to the interview day, if you do run across an accommodation request for a virtual interview schedule and you're not sure how to handle it, or if you have the capacity to handle it, as a general best practice, be sure you touch base with your HR contact at your organization just to ensure you're familiar with your obligations and options for accommodation. We're also available should you have questions, but we do recommend looping them in as well if you're not sure how to handle that request. And as your virtual interview day is approved, I'll actually be reaching out to you individually to offer to continue holding our physical interview rooms here on campus in our interview center to ensure that students who maybe don't have a quiet space to go to for their interview have an option to come here. We do encourage you to accept that offer and then include reminders for that option in your messaging to student applicants as well. And if we could go to the next slide, please. And Laura has some specific examples of engagement opportunities for fall that she'll share with us.
Great, thanks Danielle for all those helpful tips and best practices. That was wonderful. I would now like to share with you all some additional ways to engage with students for this year. You could consider partnering with student organizations, especially ones that have a professional component or one that's aligned with the major that you're interested in. We have over 350 student organizations at JMU. And there are some benefits to presenting to a student org meeting rather than creating your own virtual events. And one of them is that they already have an established time for the meeting, so you already have a captive audience. Most of the student organization meetings will be held virtually this fall, so you can save travel time and virtually connect from wherever you are. In planning these sessions, it's great to integrate technology as well as humanity. Having a human element to the presentation can be a little challenging to do through a screen, we realize, but students want to have that interaction and get their questions answered. So incorporating Q&A, a question and answer period, is very important. In your sessions, you want to be authentic and allow students to experience the types of people that work at your company. This will allow them to learn more about what it might be like to work with you and see if they can view themselves with your company in the future. It's the personal touch, the people, that help companies stand out to students and leave a lasting impression on them. Utilizing recent hires, especially alumni, in their first or second year out is a great best practice because they can talk about the transition from college to work, how they landed their position at your company, and what it's like to be a new hire. Some student organizations, as we know, are more organized than others, but once classes start in late August, that will be a good time to try to reach out and connect with them. They all have faculty advisors as well. So if your company needs help identifying student groups that might be good to connect with, please reach out to the college liaison in the area that you're interested in recruiting from. Excuse me. Also want to point out classroom presentations are another great way to engage with students. Some professors love having employers present in classes. They love the energy you all bring and the real life examples that you can provide. Other professors are not as open to having outside speakers and will recommend presenting to a student organization instead due to the limited time they have to cover the required content for their classes. This year, most of the class presentation options will be virtual for employers given the situation we have with COVID-19. We have had employers participate virtually in classes over the summer, and it was a definite value add for the students. So that's certainly an option. Like attending a student organization meeting, presenting in a class provides a captive audience because the students have to be there already. So that's a good thing to do. It's a good idea to have presentations already prepared that you can offer to a professor when you're inquiring about offering a class presentation. I have seen employers in the past develop like a virtual flyer describing the various topics they can present on, and this allowed the professor to already have an idea of the topics an employer was comfortable talking about, and it gave a good foundation to start the conversation. If you can tie class material into what your presentation is already covering, that's even better. Some examples of this could be providing a case study relevant to your work that would fit into the class content, such as a technology company talking about how they approach new product design, or a healthcare company sharing how they have changed their delivery models since COVID-19. These types of current events or case studies are ways to bring relevant examples into the classroom and can help students learn more about what your company is all about. If you'd like to learn more about the possibility of presenting in classes, which start on August 26th, as you've already heard today, please contact the appropriate college liaison. We'll be happy to help you with that. Some other things to consider, micro-internships. This might be a new term for some people. Micro-internships are paid short-term professional assignments similar to tasks that could be given to a new hire or a summer intern. Often these projects require anywhere from 5 to 40 hours of total work, and it can be from like 1 to 2 weeks, and they're all remote, which is great for this environment that we're in. Through micro-internships, you can help students apply skills learned in the classroom, gain work experience, and explore career paths, all while getting support for your organization on lower priority projects. Some examples could be social media content, data cleanup, creating content for a new web page, conducting industry research, helping to identify strategic partners. There's so many different possibilities. We partnered earlier this year with a company called Parker Dewey to coordinate micro-internships for JMU. So if you'd like to learn more about that, the link is on the slide there, and we'll be providing a link as well in the follow-up email that we send tomorrow after this event. Also, you might want to consider AMAs or Ask Me Anything sessions, which can be offered whatever virtual platform your company uses, whether it's Zoom, WebEx, BlueJeans, or I know there's a ton of different virtual options. These sessions can provide new hires with an open forum to ask general questions about your company. So there's no specific like topic, it's just open forum, ask me anything. These sessions tend to be a little more casual in nature, and students enjoy the opportunity to get their questions answered. Sessions like these can be easily set up through Handshake, like Danielle already shared earlier. Danielle shared information about how to create your own events, which can be just for JMU, or you can invite multiple schools that you recruit from. We realize hosting virtual events is very time consuming. And if you have a smaller recruiting team, creating separate events, virtual events for every school can be a little daunting. If you want to plug into already existing events, that could be a good option for you, especially if you're unable to host your own events, or you just want to partner with another group to have a virtual experience for students. Our office is creating a virtual series this fall you might want to consider participating in. We're going to have weekly sessions covering a variety of topics, such as how to succeed in virtual career fairs, how to stand out in a virtual interview, and we're going to have some other timely topics as well. All these virtual options are new for our students, and they could be new for many of you also. So we're going to be providing lots of opportunities for them to learn how to best navigate these new events that we're all a part of now. These sessions our office is sponsoring will feature multiple companies, so students will have the opportunity to be exposed to more than one company per event, so they won't have to attend so many separate events. It's okay to be in the same virtual session as one of your competitors or with a company that does the same type of work. This actually allows students to compare and learn more about various companies in a more efficient way. They're more likely to attend an event with multiple companies because it helps students maximize their time. There are so many virtual events that are already in Handshake, and there's going to be a lot more coming up. So there's a lot of competition for students to pick which ones they feel are most relevant to them. So if there's an event where they can meet multiple companies at once, that's probably going to be very attractive to them. So please let us know if you'd be interested in partnering with us on any of the new virtual program we'll be doing this fall. In the survey that you're going to receive tomorrow, there's going to be a section where you can indicate your interest. So we're all new to these virtual events, and we're all going to learn together, and we'll figure out the best ways to reach out to our students. If live events aren't something that you're excited about or something that you're not particularly wanting to do, that's totally fine too. I wanted to also mention creating videos is something that you could also do. You could create videos to showcase your company and what you look for in interns or employees. These can be put on your website, shared with us, and we can help promote or distribute them to students. We've received several of these this summer from companies, and they've been great resources for us to share with faculty and students. These pre-recorded videos can showcase your company as well as provide helpful tips to students. Last week, we received some videos with tips on how to ace a virtual interview, and they were very helpful, not only for us, but also for students. So we can share these videos with faculty to put on their campus sites, which is the learning management system that JMU uses. This is another way to help get the word out about your company, but it doesn't require you to have multiple events for every school that you may recruit from. You can shoot one video and then use it for lots of different purposes. These short videos can also be shared on your social media and could feature a variety of different topics, such as a recent intern talking about their daily activities while working for you, or there's tons of other possibilities for videos that you could create. Lastly, I want to talk about career treks or job shadow days. Those are obviously great events to have in person, but they can also work in a virtual setting too. This picture is from a career trek we took back in February of this year when it was still okay to stand close together. I miss those days. I'm sure we all probably do. Yvette and Donna from the Fairfax Falls Church Community Services Board were our wonderful hosts for the day. We toured the Fairfax County Government Center and the Merrifield Center with a group of psychology and social work majors. So in addition to the tours, we talked with multiple department representatives. We had a reception at the end of the day and had some casual networking. It was a great event and provided the students the opportunity to talk with people they could be working with in the future. They had recent hires and alumni working there, and they were great representatives to connect with our current students. So of course, an in-person career track is ideal, but in this environment, we have to think about virtual options as well. Virtual career treks are certainly something we can work with you on. We're doing a virtual job shadow day And in some ways, this can be easier for students because they don't have to travel, meaning the trip is more accessible. And not having geographic limitations is also nice because typically for career treks, we look for like 2 hours away, anywhere we can take a bus to. But if we don't have to travel or there's no like cost associated with a virtual event, it's much easier for us to go far away and try different companies out. So the virtual situation we are in is creating opportunities for students to broaden their options and their future employment considerations. So we'd love to partner with you in planning virtual career treks or job shadow days this year, but it's also fun to think about a time when we can be together again and plan ahead. So we can certainly talk about an in-person event that we can execute in the future. So all kinds of options. We're happy to talk with you about all different kinds of ideas. I know we have lots of questions in the chat, so we want to turn it over to Kate so she can, if we can't get to all of them, we will follow up individually.
That sounds great, Laura. I'll take the first couple. Someone was asking about recruiting teachers specifically, and if there'll be a fair for special education. We do have Teacher Recruitment Day that's scheduled for March 4th, 2021. And we're planning on that being a virtual fair as well, just like our fall fairs. So there'll be more information coming out about that a bit later, and a save the date that I'll send to those of you that are specifically looking to recruit teachers. So you can look forward to that in the spring. I have a couple questions for Danielle, but I'll give you a break since you were talking quite a bit, and then we'll jump back to you at the end if that works. So Logan, someone was asking just about, can someone explain the benefit and purpose of your recommendation to include pronouns during the introduction? And I know that there's a SHRM resource that was posted in the chat, but if you don't mind responding to that, that would be great.
Sure. So I know that at JMU, sharing pronouns is a very common practice now. A lot of industries are still not doing that. That's still not the norm. The primary reason that we encourage you to share pronouns is so that transgender and gender non-conforming applicants will feel more comfortable if they do need to share pronouns that may not match their presentation or what you may have thought or may have made some assumptions about them, that they will feel more comfortable sharing their actual pronouns. They may choose not to. They may choose to use what you've assumed. There's a lot of reasons for that, safety and personal preference. But it's generally so that the applicants that we have feel more comfortable sharing their actual identities. Now, if it's not the norm in your industry and you're doing a presentation and they don't want you, your company doesn't want you to use time for something like that, you are still the touch point for your organization with the applicants. So there's a lot of ways that you can personally share that. I know at JMU, oftentimes we have pronouns on our name tags, on our business cards, in our signatures. And so there's a lot of ways that you can personally make that connection with applicants so that they feel more comfortable sharing with you. And generally, I would encourage you to make that part of the culture at your organization so that you are welcoming of more identities. I will say a lot of our students really, even those who do not identify as transgender or gender nonconforming, who do prefer to be in spaces where that is part of the norm. They're just used to that now. They're advocating for their friends, and that's what they'd like to see. So I really encourage you to do that if possible. And that SHRM resource is great. So thank you, Alex, for sharing that.
Thanks, Logan. For sake of time, I'm going to jump into the next one. One of our colleagues had to step away, so I just wanted to respond to the question about a criminal justice fair. There's not plans for a specific criminal justice fair, but there is going to be a College of Arts and Letters fair in the spring of 2021. That's in the works of being planned, and you can reach out to Colleen Waller in our office, who serves as the liaison, to learn more about that, but there'll be promotions coming out later this semester about that fair in the spring. Danielle, are you ready for a number of questions that I can field to you?
Sure, Kate.
So the first one is, when do we need to have schedules in place? And when do students need to begin choosing their schedules?
I'm assuming that is specific to career fairs. So similarly to getting your promotion ready for events and things like that, The earlier the better for your scheduling is ideal. It won't be until late August that students are back on campus for us, so they won't be signing up right away. But for me, if I were signing up for the fair, if I've already signed up, I would probably try to start building my schedule by the end of August, so that by the time students are starting to think about these opportunities that's available, we'll be promoting pretty heavily to students. This is a shift for them, so there's going to be an educational component teaching them how to sign up for schedules as well. But our team members are also going to be tracking who's made their schedule yet, who hasn't. If you haven't yet and we think you should, we'll be reaching out to you individually. And if you do create your schedule early and closer to time, you're not seeing very many signups, we'll be reaching out to you about what you can do about that as well.
Great. Does every representative that they have participate, this is at the beginning of when you were talking, need to have a handshake account?
That is a wonderful question, and yes. So for all of the fairs, for safety reasons, because the video feature is being built into the fairs, Handshake decided that all employer representatives will need to have a Handshake account to be assigned to a schedule, to be able to engage with students during the career fair. It was just another safety measure to make sure there was no Zoom bombing, if you will, during the fair.
Thanks, Danielle. And a question was just asked about when you say create your schedule, are you talking about campus interviews as well, or just the career fair schedule?
Just a moment ago, I was referring to creating your schedule for the career fair. You won't create your schedule the same way for interviews, whether they be on campus or virtual. If you're thinking about creating your schedule for your interviews, that will actually be something that as you submit your initial request for your preferred interview date, you'll have some options to pick how long you want your interview day to be, if you want 30-minute versus 60-minute interview slots. And I'm also the person who will be approving all of those. So if you have any questions after you submit that request, you and I would talk pretty thoroughly about what that's going to look like. And the only other schedule piece I can think of in terms of interviews would also be your schedule timeline leading up to the day of your interviews. And that's referencing specifically how long is your application period, when is the deadline for students to apply, when is the employer's deadline to invite the students that they'd like to select to interviews, and when do students have until to actually sign up. So those are the things I was referencing when you're trying to think through how to pair when those dates are with when you should be the most engaged with other activities to sort of draw students in to be more interested in your company. Hopefully that answers that question.
And I have two other quick questions for you, Danielle. Are the breakout rooms feature available in Handshake?
So for premium employers who are using the video feature built into Handshake, I have just dropped the Handshake help article on that topic. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it, but they're using Twilio, is I believe how you say it, which does feature breakout rooms as part of its functionality, but Handshake has yet to specify which of those pieces they're pulling into their platform. I will say that our office tends to recommend, if you're not a premium employer, to use Zoom, just because students are pretty comfortable with it. And I know that Zoom did recently announce that even free accounts will be able to have breakout features as well.
That's great. And then lastly for you, will there be a number to the limit of sessions that they can host during a semester? I'm sorry, I think info sessions or just sessions? I'm not sure.
So if we're referencing info sessions or virtual events, there will not be a limit to how many of those you can host. Strategically, I would argue that you might not want to focus solely on hosting multiple sessions. You might want to sort of diversify how you're engaging with students, but we won't be limiting that. If that happened to be referencing group sessions for during career fairs, there's a limit of 5 sessions per career fair for group student engagement.